Hello, guys. Woo! You got a crowd. I don't know, somebody lied to you guys. Y'all thought y'all were getting something special and something awesome. I'm not that awesome, but my God is. Amen. Y'all are pretty lively. Listen, y'all kind of got me on edge a little bit. All these people. Turn to your neighbor, give them a high five and say, "Welcome to Celebrate Recovery." There you go. Now turn to your neighbor of your second choice and tell them, "Welcome to church." All right? All right, we can calm down now. Well, guys, it's always an honor for me to come up here. A lot of you have heard it. Then there's a lot of you guys who have not heard my testimony. I tried to revise it the best as I could and ran out of time towards the end. So it hasn't changed too much, but I'm going to make the best of it for what it is. That's what I told my wife. I said it's just going to have to be what it is, and it will be good. So with that, let me start like we always do. My name is TJ, and I'm a believer in Jesus Christ, and I'm in recovery for chemical dependency. Hey, guys. I was born in Groton, Connecticut, August 1st, 1982. I have two amazing sisters, 4 years apart from each of them. My mother and father are both actively involved in my life to this day. My dad was in the Navy and worked very hard to support his family, while my mother had a full-time job of raising 3 kids. Early on in my childhood, life seemed to be very normal. Both of my parents were always active in our lives. My father, through his busy schedule, always made time to connect with his family. I believe he did a great job on showing me how to become a man, working hard with my hands, taking care of things around the house, and how to provide for my family. I can remember on many occasions my dad getting ready to go out to sea, saying, "Okay, son, you are the man of the house while I'm gone." It's no big deal for a 6 or 7-year-old, right? I know for myself, I was more drawn, or my mother loved us very much too. I know for myself, I was more drawn to her. I guess because more time was spent around her while my dad was deployed. In between her busy days of cooking, cleaning, and running kids around to appointments and after-school activities, she always made the time to sit and talk with us. She was always very encouraging towards the things that we were interested in, like sports, band, and other activities. She always seemed to be my biggest fan in whatever I was doing. Today, I often ask myself, how did she do it without losing her mind? My earliest childhood memories would start in Folkestone, Georgia. It was a very laid-back, small town. My sister and I made friends with some of the neighborhood kids. Our time was mostly spent with school and just playing as kids do. Just down the street from where we lived was the local Baptist church that many of the kids in the area attended with their parents. It wasn't too long before my sister and I would tag along with them. I don't ever recall my father or my mother ever attending with us. The only time I can remember us all going to church would be for a funeral or a wedding, or if we were lucky, maybe an Easter visit, maybe. Being that I was so young and not being taught by my parents, I didn't understand anything about God. Most of what I did hear from other people sounded more like a fairy tale than anything else. One thing was for certain. While my mother and father were both very loving and providing for us, provided a decent home for us, Christ was not the center of our home. Even though they didn't teach us the importance of a relationship with Christ, they tried their best to teach us to have good morals in life, and even biblical ones at that. Matthew 7:12 was ingrained in me at a young age. So whatever you wish others to do to you, do also to them. Anyone from a military background knows that respect is very important. Being that we were in a military family, we never would stay put for too long. After about 4 or 5 years, it was time for us to make our next move to Currituck County, North Carolina. We got settled into a new neighborhood, enrolled in our new schools, and made a lot of new friends. The neighborhood we had moved into was huge and filled with tons of kids from all ages, so building new friendships was not hard. School was not something that came easy to me. I was one of the kids that would have to study day and night just to remember the answers for a test. Plus, I was easily distracted by other students. I was always doing more talking than doing schoolwork. I was also very worried about my appearance to my peers. I can remember going to the eye doctor and being prescribed glasses to wear. I would never wear them for the fear of being picked on by other students. And just a side note on that, I make these glasses look pretty good, if I don't say so myself. Most of the time, I would get bad grades because I couldn't see my work. About the time I got to the 6th grade, I began to notice a change among students after that summer break. Some had become popular and others not so much. I witnessed other kids being bullied and teased, and I wanted no part of that. So I made every effort to fit in with the cool kids. I even went as far as kicking my pretty decent friends to the curb, and even started bullying and teasing them just to get attention from other kids. As I drew closer to these new friends, I saw that many of them had come from broken families and were always in trouble. I didn't care. I still wanted to be part of this crowd. After school, me and my new friends would run around wild in our neighborhood. We would find big yards to play football or baseball in with the other teenagers. But other than that, we were looking for trouble. Most of the time, we were destroying other people's personal property or even government or state property. I knew what I was doing was wrong, and most of the time, I was scared while doing such acts. Scared of getting caught, going to jail, and scared of facing my dad afterwards. But not as scared as losing my friends for bailing out. I was very confused of who I was at this age. I had went through many different stages in my life, from dressing in an almost gothic fashion to being a long-haired skater boy. Whatever was trending, I was trying to be in it. Any of y'all remember the Jinko jeans days? That's this kid right here, okay? All day long. Not finding my identity in Christ, I was trying to find it in everything and everyone else. About the age of 11 or 12, me and some of my friends thought it would be cool to start smoking cigarettes. Most of all the other older teenagers and young adults were doing it, so we figured we might as well too. Scoring smokes was never too hard. My father was a smoker and always had them on hand, so occasionally I would steal a pack here and there. It was nasty at first, but eventually I got used to it, and very quickly it became a habit. It wasn't long after one of my good friends had kept telling me that his mother smoked marijuana. Every time he told me, I just found it so hard to believe. She never struck me as one to do anything wrong. Within a couple of weeks, he had raided her stash and proved it to me. Neither one of us had ever gotten high before, but that would change on this day. We snuck around to the side of the house and got high for the first time. I loved everything about the way that I felt. Everything was funny, and time had seemed to have just slowed down. I was hooked right away. I can remember that I liked it so much that I started to save my lunch money up from school every day so I could buy a sack of weed at the end of every week. In about a month, my life's mission was to get high, to get high as often as possible. I started to surround myself with much older people, mainly because I had to hang around them to get my marijuana. Every bit of my focus and my energy was on getting high. My grades in school started to plummet, and I didn't even care. Started lying to my parents every day about where I was going, just so I could get high. My parents would always give me a curfew, but I rarely ever made it back on time. I was always having too much fun, getting high and hanging out with everyone that I never wanted to leave. Both of my parents did not accept this sort of behavior. They would often ground me to the house for an extended amount of time. But I wasn't going to let that stop me from trying to go out and have the fun that I wanted to have. It seems like the more punishment I got, the more rebellious I became. At night, I would stay up late until I knew my parents were in bed and sneak out of my window to go and get high. I never had to go very far. Most everyone my age and older were doing drugs in my neighborhood. I continued this behavior for a while until I became all the more eager to get a buzz. I started leaving earlier and earlier and eventually got caught by my parents. It was very hard for me to do anything now because my parents were keeping a very close watch on me. As time went on, I was in and out of trouble with my parents, but they didn't keep me locked in the house forever. One day, some friends and me were out riding around and had gotten pulled over by the police. When the officer came up to the window, he was greeted by clouds of marijuana smoke rolling into his face. The car was so full of marijuana smoke, it looked like a scene from a Cheech and Chong movie. At 16 years of age, this would be my first charge and my first trip to jail. I felt bad, not for what I was doing, but that I had got caught. And now I had to make the dreaded phone call to my father. Both of my parents were mad and disappointed, and I was filled with so much guilt and shame. As bad as I felt, the only way I knew how to deal with my emotions was to use more to numb the pain. As time went on, I met more people who were doing different drugs. Anytime a friend told me about an experience with a new drug, I wanted to try it for myself. Around the age of 16, I started using LSD. This drug was easily accessible where we were located, and again, I was hooked. Almost every weekend for close to a year, I used this drug. All I was living for at this time was the next party. The people that I surrounded myself around, for the most part, were not believers. Most of them were agnostic or atheists. Being that I was always with them, I seemed to have just naturally adopted their beliefs. I struggled with believing in a God with so many things going wrong in the world, and why would he give people free will? It was easier for me to believe this way because I knew if I were to believe in a God, that everything in my life must change. And I was having too much fun in my sin. I didn't want to give up this selfish lifestyle. By this time, I had already failed a few grades in school. Being far behind, my folks said that they understood me for dropping out. So I did, and I got a job framing houses. My using at this point had spiraled out of control. Getting high was all day, every day. All my friends did it, and even my boss and coworkers got high. I was still living with my parents, so every bit of my money went towards drugs. I started hanging out with one of my friend's parents who also used drugs. They were always having house parties in the neighborhood, and one night, They pulled out some cocaine and offered me some. So I tried it. And of course, I loved it as well. It wasn't long after this that ecstasy had exploded in our area. So I'd be using this as well, many times mixing different drugs, trying to get higher than the last time. My life was falling apart. I wanted to do better, but I didn't know how to change. I can remember going to family reunions and seeing my cousins, whose lives seemed to have been pretty peaceful and normal. They had good, stable jobs, and their lives were going great. I wanted more than anything to be normal as well, but as soon as I got back home, I couldn't seem to separate myself from the wrong people. I would tell myself, all you have to do is stay home and make some new friends, but I never could pull it off. Romans 7:8-19 says, "For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing." So my life continued to be the same as always, living for the next party. I was arrested on 2 different occasions for possession. Each time I was given unsupervised probation with a fine. It seemed just to be a slap on the wrist charge, so I just continued to use like I had been. When I turned 19, my father had retired from the Navy. He, my mother, and my younger sister had made plans to move to Columbia, Alabama. I wanted no part of moving, so I told my parents that I would find someone to move in with there. My parents knew that my life was an absolute wreck and tried to convince me to move with them. But I wouldn't. I hated the thought of moving from all my friends and all my connections. I'll never forget the look on my dad's face and the tears shed as he hugged my neck and told his only son goodbye. Even though I didn't believe in God, He was most certainly working in my life. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." I only stayed in North Carolina for a short time. I had betrayed my best friend, who was also one of the main dealers in our area. Most of my relationships had stemmed from him, so when this friendship fell apart, so did all the others. After this had happened, I felt as if I could not trust anyone. For the longest time after this, that had become my new life motto: do not trust anyone. I figured I'd just move to Alabama to be close to my parents so I could start over, new, and get sober. In my own strength, that is. As soon as I arrived in Alabama, there was a longtime friend of the family waiting for me to pull up. My sobriety didn't last more than 10 minutes whenever I rolled up into the driveway. As soon as I got out of the car, I got into his and rode off to smoke a blunt. At first, things were kind of slow. I only knew a few people and didn't have a car or a job. But within a couple of months, I got another job doing construction. I got a car and was starting to meet other people in the area. At first, I was just smoking marijuana. But as time went on with marijuana, came other drugs. In about 3 months of living here, I was right back where I left off, smoking weed every day and spending my whole entire check on cocaine and ecstasy. Up until this point, I was never much into drinking. I would spend a lot of time around my parents' house and other relatives who drank excessively at family barbecues. It wasn't long before I would start to partake in the drinking with them. And it wasn't long before that I would become a full-blown alcoholic. Eventually, I moved in with some friends and did fairly well for a little while with not using hard drugs. As soon as I got a little comfortable, I started seeking cocaine again. It wasn't long before that I would start to binge on this. My partying was so out of control, I moved out because I couldn't pay my share of the rent due to my habit. So I moved back in with Mom and Dad for a little while. Shortly after, I got into a relationship with a girl whose lifestyle seemed to have matched mine, so I moved in with her and her mother. The three of us drank and smoked pot every night for about 6 months. Every time I would drink a lot, it seems that I would always be pulled back towards my cocaine addiction. This relationship would be shortly lived because my girlfriend gave me the option of cocaine or her. So I chose the drugs, as I always did. I figured one-night stands with no strings attached were the best thing for me. Relationships just got in the way of what I was trying to do. As time went on, I would be in and out of my parents' house. Most of the time it seemed easier just to be there because I didn't pay any rent, and all the money could go to drugs. After a little while, I was introduced to a new drug that I'd never done before, methamphetamines. This drug was considerably cheaper than cocaine and lasted way longer. I was trying to be better at keeping my job and making it to work every day on time. So at first, I only did it on the weekends. I started to meet all kinds of different people where we would stay up the whole entire weekend. I met another girl who would become my girlfriend. She was selling meth and would have several ounces at a time. What started to be just a weekend gig had now become an everyday event, and would not even go to sleep for whole weeks at a time sometimes. I became very paranoid and I didn't trust anyone. I stopped going into work completely and was fired. I lived this way for about a year until I couldn't take it any longer. I still wasn't going to turn to God, so I turned to the only hope I knew, my parents. I told them what I had been using and how tired I was of being a drug addict, so they took me to Bradford Health Services. I was brutally honest with the young lady who evaluated me. She told my parents that I would need inpatient treatment, that the cost was $8,000 with no insurance. My parents were willing to pay the high cost for my health. While they were willing to pay, deep down inside, I knew I wasn't ready to stop. I just wanted a little break. On the way home, I told them, don't do it. I didn't want them to waste their money. I got sober for about 4 months, then started to hang out with the same old friends, doing the same old things. Somewhere along the way, I had just given up. I thought that this was it. This was just my life. In and out of relationships and one-night stands, and my drug use skyrocketing every day. When I was 28, my father broke the news to the family that he and my mother were getting a divorce. I was devastated. And the only way that I knew to cope was to use more. Somewhere around this time, a guy that I worked with had told me that he was manufacturing meth. I figured that I would learn how to make meth so I could save money. So I went over to his house, and the next day, I knew everything I needed to know for manufacturing. My drug use was so frequent that I was not getting the high that I used to. I had built up a higher tolerance. I used to always be that addict that said, if I ever have to use needles, then I'll just quit. The idea may have sounded nice, but it wouldn't become my reality. Now I was injecting myself every day just to get high. About a year later, I ran into an old friend that I used to use with. She had been in recovery, but had fell into a relapse. We were hanging out with each other all the time, feeding off one another's addictions. We would use meth as often as possible and take all different kinds of benzos just to be able to calm down and to get a little rest here and there. After a couple of months of hanging out together, we had gotten into a relationship with each other. For the first 6 months, our drug use was the most intense that it had ever been. Around this time, I was feeling a lot of guilt and a lot of shame for the way that I had been living. I was finally starting to near my bottom of addiction. I was finally sick and tired of being sick and tired. All the missing work, missing family events, sleepless nights, and trying to hide track marks had caught up with me. I made a decision to get sober and told Amy I was done using. We both stopped using and were holding each other accountable. It was a struggle, but we managed to stay clean from drugs. However, I would still have my occasional drinks throughout the week and on the weekends. I can remember at times Amy telling me that we needed recovery. I hated to hear her say that, like I had a problem or something. I wanted nothing to do with any kind of recovery. I had everything under control, or so I thought. When I finally got my head above the heavy fog that I had been in for so many years, God started to intervene in my life. I knew this time it was going to take a power greater than myself to keep me off of drugs. In 2012, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I was slowly starting to surrender areas of my life over to God. Amy and I were still very much in love with one another, and on June 18, 2012, we got married. I knew she didn't 100% approve of my drinking, but I told her on the night of our honeymoon that I would like to have some drinks. At the time, I didn't know how to have a good time without a drink. Plus, it had always been a way that I dealt with my emotions. On our honeymoon weekend, we did some serious binge drinking. We bounced around from club to club in Panama City Beach. We were both heavily intoxicated. I can remember getting into a fight at a club and then getting into a fight in the car. I was so drunk I couldn't process my emotions. And I ended up snatching the car off the road in a drunken rage. Sometimes that doesn't get easier. Almost killing my wife and myself. The car was completely totaled. By the grace of God, neither one of us were seriously hurt. My wife was going to the hospital while I was in the back of a cop car. I somehow got out of going to jail and getting a DUI. I'll never understand that. When I got to the hospital, I arrived in the room where my wife was. I sobered up really quick. And I saw her face all bruised. I couldn't believe that I had done that to her. God was really with us that night. No jail, no DUI, and my wife forgave me. With the exception that I was going to get recovery. A week or two later, I was going to AA meetings. I very quickly got a sponsor. I didn't really get too far in AA. I think because I was a new believer, and I just needed a whole lot more Jesus in my life. Amy had kept mentioning Celebrate Recovery to me. Deep down inside, I wanted to go, but I was really struggling with my anxiety. We finally made it on a Friday night. My nerves were totally shot. I hated crowds of people, and I didn't like talking to new people, especially about any of my problems. For the next few months, I would try to find any excuse not to go. I managed to tough it out, though. I owed it to my wife, I owed it to myself, and more than that, I owed it to God. I was struggling so much with accepting forgiveness from God and forgiving myself for what I had done. Everyone here was so encouraging. I slowly started to calm my anxiety. I knew the only way to grow was to be honest about myself and to find a sponsor to help me along the way. I was encouraged to find areas to serve here at CR. The more I helped, the more I felt a part of Celebrate Recovery. I always loved to hear the worship at the beginning of CR, and music had always been a big part of my life. After sharing this with some of the men here and telling them that I played guitar, I very quickly found my way serving with the worship team as well. As I continued to make regular attendance at CR, I became a co-group leader and a group leader. And later down the road, my wife and I became the e-coaches to help encourage others to serve in areas of leadership. This is where I have to kind of wing it a little bit because things have changed. And none of these things I'm qualified for. Neither one of them. You've heard at the beginning of my testimony that I was that guy that wouldn't get up in front of his class. That was me. It is God surely working through me. God has plans for me. I never wanted to be up here with a microphone, and I never in my life thought that I would be leading a ministry for a bunch of people. I can't take credit for any of these accomplishments because I was that kid who would always take the failing grade because I didn't want to do a project for my peers. This is surely God working through me. While my anxiety can still get to me in times of teaching a lesson or in worship, I remember God's word for us in Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. God has been so good to me through this journey. My wife and I are as close as we have ever been. I have been blessed with an awesome job. And I have been blessed. He has blessed us with many children. We have 5 wonderful, amazing kids. I married into 2. I wanted an extra, and I got 2 bonuses. Amen. He has also restored many of my relationships with my family. Today, I have an amazing relationship with both of my sisters and my mother and my father. And in the process of working through this beautiful ministry and getting close to the Lord, my dad, who was so lost, saw a change in his son, and he knew that he needed whatever I had. My father came to me. My father came to me completely broken. Whenever he had called me, I knew what I needed to do. And so I met with him. He was completely lost, so I got to lead my dad in a prayer of salvation. I used to not even be able to take care of myself, much less take care of a family of 7. Celebrate Recovery has been our second home on Friday nights for the past, how long have we been here? 6 years? 6 years. We're going to call it 6. I have made many great friendships while being here, true friendships with people who care about my sobriety and my walk with Jesus Christ. Sponsorship and accountability has been a vital part of my recovery. If it weren't for all the people in my life today, my recovery would have failed a long time ago. Working the steps with a sponsor has changed my life so much, and it continues to change my life as I find other areas to work on and surrender to God. While all the steps are important, step 12 will be my favorite today. I get the pleasure of sharing all the great things the Lord has done in my life with others. It's so amazing to tell someone just a little bit of my past. They see where I'm at today and they can't even believe the life that I had lived through. Hebrews 4:12 says, "For the word of God is alive and active, sharper than any double-edged sword. It penetrates even to dividing soul and spirit, joints and marrow. It judges the thoughts and the attitudes of the heart." Whenever I read Scripture and I apply it to my life, I know it's going to change my life. God has changed my life so much. I know that more change is on the way. And honestly, guys, these last couple years has just been the most amazing part of my life. I'm leading a ministry, and I'm witnessing people in this ministry grow. It keeps my faith on high. I see repeatedly what God is doing in other people's lives. I can't thank God enough for the many blessings He continues to pour over my family. And guys, I have to thank each and every one of you for coming out and hearing this testimony. Thank you, guys.